Welcome to the DMF. I am your host, Justin Yachts, and I have a special guest with me today. I have books with Timo, or Timo's Notes, and enjoy. Okay, I have a special guest with me today, Timo from Instagram. Book with Timo. Books with Timo is the Instagram tag. How are you doing, Timo?
Hey Justin, I'm fine. Thanks so much for having me on today.
Thank you so much for doing this. This is great. So first question I got is, how did the Instagram page come about?
Yeah, so that's actually almost 4 years back now. So I used to experiment with Instagram a little already. I tried different things on there just because I thought it was fun. So I had one page where I just shared pictures of sunsets, for example, and stuff like
Hmm.
that. And then I got into reading self-help books, personal development books, and stuff like that. And I read Crush It by Gary Vaynerchuk. I don't know if you know the book.
What is it again? Should
It's
you pronounce?
Crush It.
Oh, yes, I do know that book.
Yeah.
Great
And
book.
and I've read that one, and Gary talks about building a personal brand online and all that kind of stuff. And he had me thinking about, well, what am I good at, or what do I know a lot about, and what do I love to talk about, which is the most important thing. And I came up with the idea of talking about books, sharing what books I'm reading, why I'm reading them, what I take away from them. And that's how I started the page, because just kind of sharing the books I'm reading. Yeah.
Was there was Crush It the book that really like inspired you to read more self-help books, or was that just the one that inspired you to start the Instagram page and become more of a presence online?
Exactly. Yeah. So it inspired me to do the Instagram thing and share what I'm reading. The book that inspired me to read more was actually Rich Dad Poor Dad, which was one of the first ones I read. And he talks about the power of self-improvement and stuff like that. And so that's what got me into reading more.
What do you think it is about? Because that is a common book that comes up with people I interview is Rich Dad, Poor Dad. It seems to be the book that really just makes everybody just change their thought process of how they see money and how they see things. For me, I read it. It changed my life as well. What do you think it is about that book specifically that does it?
Hmm. That's an interesting question, actually, and I've never thought about it. But one thing that comes to my mind is that it's quite easy to digest, and it doesn't have many different, like, big points that it's making. It's making a few points and kind of repeating them and really focusing on these key things over the entire book. So I think that's what makes it easy to digest. It's based on a story. And yeah, I think for most people, it's just they can relate in the way that they feel in school. They never learned about such stuff,
Mm.
like financial literacy stuff, which he provides a great introduction to. So I think it's just that it's kind of easy to comprehend. It has a few key points that the author brings across like religiously, and yeah, I think that's what makes it so powerful.
So you think like the reinforcement and probably the vernacular, since it's not written in like The Intelligent Investor, that's a
Yeah,
book that is,
tough to
that,
read.
that that's a tough book to read. It's almost reading a textbook. It's very
Yeah.
thorough and it'll teach you a lot, but I think you're right. Rich Dad, Poor Dad only, it takes this basic concept and then just continues to repeat it in different ways so that it's reinforcing it. Also, I'm going to add to that. I think it's the liabilities and assets, the way it puts that into perspective. Not
Mm.
a lot of financial books really have been like, okay, here's what the middle class is doing, here's what the lower class is doing, here's what the upper class is doing. These are the differences. they're using cash flow to build, to buy things, as opposed to just taking the money that you make with a paycheck. And then
Mm,
he's got the contrast between the two. You've got, his poor dad and his rich dad. Whether they're his real father or not, the story works, and it gives you that parable of what's going on. So I don't know. It's just fascinating because I feel like that book is really almost, in some ways, it stood the test of time. I mean, it's not
mm,
Think and Grow Rich yet, but I think probably we will be looking back at that book, and it's like, it's a question I always come back to, is like, why do you think it's not being taught in schools?
it's it's a good question. So I don't know why they wouldn't do it. And actually, I read just recently that some state, I believe in the US, introduced a class on financial literacy or something like that in high
Wow.
school. I'm not quite sure if I got that right, but so one theory that I read about is that school in the past used to be to educate people just enough for them to work um, in what's it called, blue collar jobs, basically.
Yeah.
So in the industry, kind of. Um, and they don't have to know financial literacy stuff to be able to work in a at a company to produce steel or whatever. So that's one theory that I read. I don't know if it's true, but it could
Mm.
be. I'm not sure why they don't just educate people on it. But I think what makes Rich Dad Poor Dad so popular too is that it's quite controversial, especially statements like that your house is not an asset but a liability. I feel like many people also feel kind of offended by it. So
Yeah.
it makes the book and the topic more interesting to talk about because people have a personal relation and they kind of feel like the book is telling them that what they are doing is wrong.
Yeah.
So I think at least anybody who reads the book knows at least one person who's probably doing things wrong. So
Absolutely.
and even
That
I gave yeah
that's the thing, that like you read it and all of a sudden you're like, oh wow, I didn't
yeah, you're like,
realize
I'm so
that. Everybody
stupid,
I
I did
know
this
is
wrong. Yeah,
yeah, I think that might be it. It's very in your face, and it's not apologetic
yeah.
about what it is. It's not going, man, this is how it's like, no, this is how it is. And I think one of the things that people, I don't see this getting talked about enough, is the idea of getting away from the employee mindset. Like
Mm,
the rich dad said, look, I'm not going to pay you because I don't want you to think like an employee. I want you to
mm,
think I want you to think like an entrepreneur. I want you to think like a visionary. And I think people get so sucked into that. It's like, oh, I got a paycheck. It's like that. It's like, that's one form of income.
yeah.
And I think it flies in the face. Also, it could be a form of control for
Yeah,
the government.
that's true, and that's kind of what I was trying to say. And as you said, um, that's probably the word I was missing. School teaches you to be an employee and
Mm,
not be an entrepreneur or self-employed or anything like that. Anything outside the box. Like you don't have to go to school if you want to be an athlete. Oh,
yeah.
I know in the US it's different because you get like you do a lot of sports at college and stuff like that, but in Germany it's entirely different. Like sports and school is not really related, so
Mm.
you basically just go there to learn to become an employee.
What subjects are like the main subjects taught in German schools?
Yeah, so it's the main focus is on stuff like math and German, so language skills, which honestly no one probably ever needs again after finishing
Yeah.
school because it's
Yeah.
such an advanced stuff. And then there is like a broad um, variety of topics like history, biology, chemistry, physics, religion, and stuff like that, arts. And you can, to some extent, choose what you want to do, but most of the things is just that. Like you have these classes and probably a couple more that I missed, that I forgot to add. And you have about 2 to 4 hours each week of these classes. So yeah.
So it's so interesting. So it's very similar to the US. You're given an assortment of topics,
Yeah.
subjects, and you kind of get a little bit of an idea. That's my problem, I think, with school
Mm,
is you're getting a subject, but since they're like kind of trying to like make you more well-rounded,
mm,
it could be a subject you have no interest in. And I think if we looked at more of it maybe like college where you pick the subjects that you're interested in,
yeah.
although then gets into the problem most people are just some classes would be empty.
Yeah.
Nobody's here in English. Nobody's taking this class, so it's funny. um
That's right. Yeah.
so so how did you have you always been a reader, or was self-help books the introduction to becoming kind of a reader?
Yeah. So I would consider myself a reader from an early age. Like as a child, I read a lot of fiction books and also children books. But then, yeah, during school, during high school especially, I wasn't reading much because I don't know, there was just other stuff to do, hang out with friends, play video games, whatever,
Yeah.
do sports and stuff like that. So I didn't enjoy it as much during that time. But then, funnily enough, in my last year of high school, when we were on like when we had vacation, I picked up a random book that my mom had on our table, and it was about this German mountaineer, Reinhold Messner, which you might know, but you don't have to. But
Mm.
he's quite popular in Germany, and I read it, and it really sparked my interest in reading again, because this wasn't the book that, I don't know, was just talking about something I was not interested in. I realized that the storytelling of it and everything just was so exciting, and I couldn't put the book down. So after that, I started getting into reading more again. Generally, I picked topics that interested me, like current political topics and stuff like that. And then I don't even know why, but at some point I got Rich Dad Poor Dad and a couple other personal development books. And then, as I said, Rich Dad Poor Dad sparked that interest. And then I really got into that genre of books. But yeah, I'm also enjoying other books like biographies, which I wouldn't generally classify as personal development.
Yeah.
But yeah, just nonfiction books in general really got me curious after school. And that's also something I wanted to add to our previous point, was that after school, or even right now, I realized that I'm getting interested in topics that I would never have thought were interesting back in school. For example, in school, I didn't really enjoy history at all. I didn't know why I should care about what happened 100 years ago or whatever. But now that I can read like biographies or memoirs that are, yeah, kind of
Yeah.
talking about history, I start realizing that it is actually really interesting. And I started reading a lot of books about the Holocaust in Germany and stuff like that, because obviously that's a bigger thing in Germany. And yeah, I just started realizing these things are actually interesting. And the problem probably was that I couldn't choose myself what I want to learn and read about, but school told me what I have to learn. And now I can pick for myself. And so that's just way easier and way more exciting.
Do you think that might be the problem, is that school in itself is kind of stops the learning because it's like it's being foisted upon me.
Mm,
I have to work, I have to do this. Whereas like you said, throughout, throughout your, finding these nonfiction books, you have found that actually you do enjoy history.
mm. Yeah, totally.
Uh,
I think that's the biggest problem of school, that the kids feel like they have to do this, or have to know about this, even if they don't want to, or they don't. I think teachers could do a better job of explaining to children why these things are interesting or good to know. It's kind of like they're
yeah.
just throwing random knowledge at them, but I don't even know why they should know this.
Yeah. I think it would be good if they explained, like, look, if you look at the parallels in history, you can see the similarities to where we are now. Because I
Mm,
think if they brought it back to where we are now, I mean, you look at you mentioned, I don't know if have you ever looked at the Weimar Republic source book? It's a very thick book, but it's,
mm,
it goes into how things happened, in Germany. You look at, the French Revolution, you can see similarities in the class systems today. I think if they brought more of that to to students, they would see, they'd be like, oh, okay, this actually has something to do with me, as opposed to looking at it like, yeah, this is a million years ago. Why should I care?
yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
One thing I wanted to ask you about now with Rich Dad Poor Dad, uh, was that recommended to you, or did you just stumble upon it?
Yeah, I think that I first was introduced to it by a YouTube channel that I watched back then. So I don't really know how I got into the YouTube channel, but it was Valuetainment by Patrick Bet David. I don't know if you've
Yeah.
heard about it before. It has grown quite big now, but back then it had just a couple 100,000 followers. I think now they have almost 3 million or something like that. And yeah, he's a huge fan of the book, Rich Dad Poor Dad. He always suggested it, so that's kind of how I picked it up. And generally, he recommends a lot of, and generally he says reading nonfiction books is very valuable, and gives a couple of recommendations. And then the first one that he says, well, absolutely everybody should just read it, was Rich Dad Poor Dad. So that's why I picked it up in the beginning.
Yeah, it's fine. Have you read any of the other Robert Kiyosaki books?
Not yet, actually. Have you?
Yes. I, I, I I'm interested to read that book that was it that why A students work for C students. That
Yeah,
seems like that seems like an interesting book. Like,
it does.
that's a title that's gonna throw, people don't want to hear me. What do you mean? A students are supposed
Exactly.
to work for C students?
It's
So
that controversial title again.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what he does is he
Mm,
brings a lot of that controversy to it. You could even see him with, he's mentioning Donald Trump in some of his videos, and he's like,
mm.
well, he's going to win again. He knows that's going to upset people.
They
It's going to get
actually
people to
wrote a
think.
book together. Did you know that?
I know they did. Did they actually? What is it called though? I mean,
I don't remember the title right now, but I remember seeing that they co-authored a book.
yeah.
But that was like, I think it was probably 20 or 30 years ago. I don't even know exactly
I
how.
thought I thought Trump wrote like the foreword and he just wrote the rest of the
Yeah,
book or
that's
something.
possible. I don't know. I'm not sure. I just saw that they both mentioned as the author, and I thought
Yeah.
that was funny.
So it's fun, he's no stranger to controversy because I mean, if he was, if he didn't want that out there, I don't think there's any mention. Why would he mention a controversial figure like that? But I think that's part of his brand is just, putting it right in the face and, like that title, why A students work for C students.
And it seems to work. I mean,
It
his
really
books are
does.
very popular. Yeah.
Yeah. I do have a bone to pick with him on one thing. They had on Instagram like teach a class or something, but it ended up not being him. It ended up being somebody else. And I was like,
Okay.
well, what is this? I,
Yeah, that's
I want to just
confusing.
hear, I just want to hear from you. I'm sure this guy's really well qualified, but I want to hear from Robert Kiyosaki. I want to hear from the guy who wrote the book. Do you have top five favorite nonfiction books?
Yeah, I kind of have a top five. I definitely have a top four. The fifth one is kind of changing every now and
Yeah.
then. But my top four are, for one, Atomic Habits by James Clear, which probably everybody who's been into the game for a while knows. It's kind of the habit Bible, I'd say. And then
Yeah.
the second one is Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins, which is my favorite biography of all time. I've listened to the audiobook at least 4 or 5 times. It's phenomenal. So for everyone who hasn't read or has read the book but hasn't listened to the audio, I can highly recommend that as well, because it's kind of a mixture between audio and podcast. He has someone who reads the book, and then every now and then David Goggins jumps in and they have a conversation about certain details in the book. So if you have the
Really
audio, you actually get a little bonus.
interesting. So he comes in and explain and goes into more detail on certain aspects. Okay,
Yeah,
that's something interesting to know. I didn't know that because I
yeah, it's
have the
really
book
cool.
and I'm like starting to read it. But yeah, that sounds interesting. So he would have, yeah. So you got somebody who's reading the book, and then he'll come in and explain, because he's very animated when he talks,
Yeah,
especially in his interviews. Like he's very like, you would talk about in your face. He's somebody who will be like, look, this, you know, keep going. don't
absolutely.
don't fail here. If you
That's the
fail
thing.
here,
Yeah,
everything else fails. What are the other books? I'm curious.
yeah. The third one is The Power of Your Subconscious Mind by Dr. Joseph Murphy.
Such okay. I'm so glad you brought that up, because
Why is that?
I say this because that's like the first book that like really kind of introduced me to like the law of attraction. I was in my acting class and I saw it like on the shelf and I was like, can I borrow this? And I was looking at it and it like completely changed my view of like looking at my life as, just being circumstance and being like,
Mm,
oh, okay, I can actually have control. And one of the things that really jumped out at me was the guy. He tells the story of the guy who said, if I would give my right arm for my daughter to come out of cancer.
mm,
He gets in a car wreck and he loses his right arm and she comes out of it. And I'm like, that
it's crazy.
is, I mean, it's interesting because you'll tell that story to certain people and they're just like, well, that's, that didn't actually happen. How
It's
do you know?
coincidence.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
coincidence or whatever. But for me and like somebody like you, like we look at it and go, oh wow, that shows the power of thought and the power
yeah,
of, and if you understand that stuff, it makes a lot of sense.
yeah.
More than the idea of just life happening to you. And I found his book to be just like really eye-opening.
Absolutely. As you said, it did the same thing for me, kind of. It really changed my perspective on how powerful our own thoughts are. And as you said, it's not about circumstance, but we can actually influence our own subconscious mind, which then influences our entire life, basically. So that's really powerful. And I want to get into stuff by Dr. Joe Dispenza. I haven't read any of his books yet, but he kind of talks about this in depth too. So I'm curious to read more about it.
I've read some of his books. I've read Becoming Supernatural.
Really.
That's like the big one. It's a thick book, but the way he goes into it, he goes into the basic terms. It's almost like some ways I think it would be kind of like a rich dad, poor dad of thinking in that way.
Mm,
I think Power of the Subconscious Mind does a better job of getting it to the basic element,
mm,
because he just uses so many stories that you can like apply to life and go, oh, that. Whereas he's talking more in his his meditations, and I've bought some of them. I find the hardest, because it's his stuff is really about, you have to let go of who you are, your identity, to build a
mm.
new identity. And it's really hard sometimes to do that in an hour meditation, because I'm just kind of like, sometimes I'll fall asleep, sometimes I'll do that, like I'm
Yeah.
like tempted to like go and meet him and find. But yes, I can't recommend his books enough, and his meditations. But yeah, read the books first, because that'll tell you how to do it. You could start with the first one. Becoming Supernatural is what I started with.
Mm,
And he's a fascinating. I mean, he's another one who got in a bike accident and brought himself back to life by his mind. And
mm.
people don't realize how much control we actually have over our own life. People like want to just believe that it's just like, well, there's nothing I can do about it. It's like, no, there's always something you can do about it, because it's the one thing you can control. this, your
Yeah.
thoughts. And that's why meditation is so good, because it teaches you to get the thoughts in order. Now
Mm.
his is very, I find his stuff very daunting, but I can't recommend it enough, because it's really good. Another book I would recommend in that area, and this is a really some interesting concepts here, is Transurfing
Mm.
by Vadim Zealand. I'll I'll put it in. I'll text you the book.
Awesome.
But yeah, Vadim Zealand, Transurfing, volumes 1 through 5. That's once you put that in, you'll find it. But it's an interest. He's another one with a really interesting Neville Goddard is another guy who really understood the law of attraction at a time when, like,
Mm.
there was no medicine, there were no, podcasts or anything. Like, people just looked at you like you were crazy or whatever, but he understood
Yeah.
these laws. Like, you can imagine, like, 50 years ago being like, well, I believe I can control my life. What? Get out of
Yeah.
here. call the call the people in the white coats. Let's get him. It's Let's get him fitted for a lobotomy. We must fix
True.
his brain. There's
Yeah.
something wrong with the brain.
And I'm glad that
So
nowadays people don't look at it this way
yeah.
anymore. People are way more open for things like that. Not
And
many, but some people. And yeah.
yeah, most how is it in Germany? Because Germany, has very, from the people that I talk to, like, you guys are, always right on time, and that's what I love about, the train. Everything.
Mm.
My friend told me of a story. He was on a train, and there was a woman from Germany, and she couldn't understand why the train was late. And it's like, yeah, in Germany that never happens, but here in America they'll just like sit, waiting.
Yeah. That's actually
You know,
funny because that's the only thing that's late in Germany. It's the train, and it's
really?
even yeah, actually, and it has become such a thing that no one expects the train to be on time. It's
Well, okay.
hilarious. Like,
Oh wow.
yeah,
Okay, so it's a different dynamic then.
yeah.
Okay, yeah,
That's
no,
but
that makes
that's as you said, that's the only thing in Germany that's late. Like
yeah,
everything else is usually on time and all that kind
yeah,
of stuff. Like buses and stuff like that on time, but trains no.
yeah.
So it's funny that she was actually
Yeah.
wondering about a train being too late. Like
Oh yeah.
that's the
I
thing
know.
in Germany too. Yeah, but
So
I think you
um
wanted to ask how I feel about German people being open for stuff like that.
yeah, how do you what do you find? How do you what do you find in general, what's the general consensus?
Yeah, so I mean, it's always hard to say because we are kind of living in our own bubble always, and it's hard
Yeah.
to grasp that this is actually a thing, living in a bubble. But I feel like generally in Germany, people aren't as open as in other parts of the world. Like German people aren't as much into, I'd call it spirituality and stuff like that,
Yeah.
because they're more like um yeah, into logic and rational thinking and stuff like that. Yeah, as you said, like there are certain
For
rules and
for
it goes like that.
yeah.
So
Yeah, I took an acting technique there. I wasn't in Germany, but I worked with him through these means here. It's called pair to comp emotional method. Uh, and he said that was the hardest thing to get the German people to understand, that like this is a different way of looking at it, because they're very
mm,
set in their ways. So it's interesting. You still have that in America. Like, there are a lot of people that just they really want to believe that life just happens to them. They have no control over it. That
mm,
it's like the victim mentality.
yeah.
And I think a lot of it comes from the fact that we live in a society now where we don't have to, it's not like in prehistorical times where we had to, find food and things like that.
Mm,
Everything is kind of, so when things are given to you, you get set into a certain way of thinking and being like, well, this is the way it is, and
mm,
it's like, but no, not necessarily.
yeah. Yeah, as I said, it's a totally different like time we're living in because we don't have to care about how do we get food. Like we don't have to build our own shelter. We just pay someone some money and then we can live in the
Yeah,
house that's already built and stuff like that. So
yeah,
it's
like
kind of
the concept of a house was unknown for certain people
yeah.
years ago. I mean, many, 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 many years ago. But yet the idea of, people, sleeping in a house. I mean, it's interesting as time goes on. And I think we're now at this seismic change where like the spiritual force and the scientific force are kind of merging in one, and we're kind of seeing how they both can bridge the gap, as opposed to where before it was like it was only spiritual,
Mm,
where like we were praying to multiple god, we went from multiple gods to one god to Darwin's idea where there was no, to take the spiritual aspect out completely, and now we're kind of like
mm,
in the middle here, and I think
yeah.
that's like the sweet spot that we've been trying to reach.
Yeah, I agree. That's an interesting observation. I never really thought about it this way, but I think you got a point there. Yeah.
um so what's the so that's 3 books. What's the 4th book?
Yeah, right. So the fourth one actually is Rich Dad Poor Dad, which we talked about already. I mean, the love of the book is rooted in it being one of my first books, obviously, and
Yeah,
then as we talked about, what makes the book so special. So
yeah.
I really am a fan of that book. And then the fifth one right now, I'd say, is probably Limitless by Jim Quick. I've read,
I've that's great. He's a fascinating story when you look at
yeah,
what he came through, being the boy with the broken brain, they called him.
exactly. Yeah.
And he was able to take the concepts of like how people were learning to memorize and bring that to into the work, and then you see him, he's helping out the cast of Days of Future Past, the X-Men movie,
Mm,
you're seeing all this. I mean, such an incredible story. And yeah, he has such unique I'd like to see him write another book, one more that's just not really about the story, more about the techniques.
mm,
You could take his class, and they're there, and I've taken them. The thing I find is after a while, there's nowhere else to go after that, and I feel like
mm,
there's still more concepts I want. That's somebody that I would love to interview, because I think his
yeah.
book is fantastic. The fact that he preaches, speed reading, even though I think the concept of speed reading is kind of it's kind of like when you say video games, it makes it sound like it's play instead of
Mm,
realizing that it's a form of art.
mm,
And the last person that I interviewed about, he was talking to me because he reads 1,000 words a minute, and
really.
he reads a book a day. And he was
Wow.
telling me the way he came across this is by, instead of seeing the words, he sees a picture.
Mm,
He interprets it as a picture. And I think maybe that's where we're getting lost, is because he used the analogy. He said, when you're driving down the road, you're going just 35 or so, it's like, this is boring. And then when you're driving really fast, you become more attentive, the
yeah.
faster you go. So in some ways, he's looking at it saying, so speed is the friend of concentration, because you're more
Mm,
concentrated, and
yeah.
you take in more, as opposed to when you're like just, but we're taught to read like one, word a second, instead of seeing multiple words and seeing the concept of it. And I think
Mm,
also we get bogged down with trying to, take in the entire book, as opposed to just be like, take in the big picture and then get some concepts, because it's impossible to get the whole the whole book, so I think it's kind of analysis by paralysis in some ways,
mm,
where we're just kind of going through. But that's how he explained it, and I've been like looking at that, and I'm like, that's an interesting way to do it. And he's talking about working with somebody to build like an app where like you would have the sentence and then you'd have the picture there, so that we could
Wow.
build the idea. Because I think, I mean, if you could read 1,000 words per minute, I mean, that's a way to get. I mean, imagine how many books you can get through, how much
Mhm.
work you can get done. It's I know
Absolutely.
what is it? Elon Musk is working on the Neuralink, which
Mhm.
I don't know how you're going to sell that to the general population. Okay, so you're gonna come into this store. We're gonna implant this thing in you, and then you're gonna be able to take information. It's like, yeah, it's gonna be kind of hard. That's that's gonna be like when they invented the automobile. They probably were like, "What are these dragons? What's this
Yeah.
monstrosity of the Neuralink?" Like when I tell people that, they're like, I don't want to be first for that." But I'm like, but if it actually does what it says, I mean, that's a new way of looking at things.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
crazy what he's up to. As you said, it
yeah,
would probably take at least a couple of years for people to be willing to test it. I mean, there are
yeah,
always a few people who are
yeah,
like open from the start, but definitely. So, and
yeah,
yeah, as you said, Jim Quick, I mean, his interpretation of speed reading is, I think, is really good because he doesn't make some kind of you're gonna read a book a day necessarily out of it,
yeah,
and you have these weird techniques where you like skim across the entire page in 1 second and stuff like that. Like he doesn't do that. Yeah, he
yeah,
actually does
yeah,
methods that sound like they are real.
yeah,
So it's
yeah,
not the typical speed reading classes that you might have heard before. And that's what I like about his way of teaching. And I remember him saying that for him, reading a book is kind of like watching a movie. So I think that's also what your interview guest was referring to. It's kind of they see the pictures instead of
yeah,
reading the words. And that's a point that would be very exciting to get to, where reading a book
yeah.
feels like watching a movie.
And I think, I mean, you see that with fiction books, the picture will come in. But with
Mm.
nonfiction books, it's hard because it's like, I will persevere through, strength. It's like, how do you uh I guess a guy holding a sword or something, be like,
Yeah.
yes, onward.
It's not
I was
that
going to the
visual, yeah.
great. Yeah, it's like, so it's like when you get to nonfiction books, it's harder to take in. I'm reading Jay Shetty's book, Think Like a Monk, and I don't know if you've read that book, but it's an interesting way of looking at things. Because here's somebody who pretty much had a lot of things figured out, and then he decides to give it all up to become a monk. And then he writes
Mm.
this book showing us things that monks do that we can apply to our life. It doesn't have to just be, the removal of everything. They actually told him, you need to go back into the world because you could teach this to the people that, to the Western world,
Mm.
how to apply these techniques. So that brings me to my next one. How long do you like to read? I'm always
Mm.
fascinated by people by this.
I think because I don't really look at the clock when I'm reading, but it's usually, I would say, around 30 minutes to an
Yeah.
hour. But sometimes it's less because I also like to squeeze in reading if I have 10 or 15 minutes here and there. But
Yeah.
when I sit down and read, then it's usually 30 minutes. Also because um, I like taking a break after that and maybe, I don't know, get a snack, something
Yeah.
like that. And then sometimes I go back and read a little more, or I go and do other stuff. But I think so. Usually it's around 30 minutes.
Do you prefer a regular book, or do you use like an ebook like the Kindle that I have right here?
Yeah, I have a Kindle too, but I actually prefer regular books just because I like the touch and feel of things, and like
Yeah.
I just think it's more comfortable. But I
Mm,
definitely agree that Kindle has a lot of benefits, especially for note taking and space, and also cost, because ebooks are usually way cheaper than the physical copies.
absolutely. And also the fact you can change the font,
Mm,
things that you can't do with a regular book, if you change
yeah.
the book, the font, you have to rewrite the book.
And I've actually, for some books, I felt like reading more was easier when I was reading on a Kindle, because I've read some books quite fast, and then I was like, well, this felt like a 200-page book, and I looked it up, and it was like 400 pages. And I'm like, what? This felt so like quick and easy to read.
That's something I'm experiencing too. That's why I've kind of been like, especially with certain books like 48 Laws of Power, there's something about it that like kind of breaks down that idea of holding that giant book in your
Mm.
hand and being like, it's like before you know it, you realize you're like, oh wow, I read it. It's
Yeah.
it's done. I think because you can't see the pages really,
Mm.
it takes away that idea of like this is a giant book. You're
Mm.
just kind of and what I like about the Kindle is it allows us to be able to read anywhere. We can
Mm.
you can take it anywhere. Like there's no excuse not to read, which is the next thing I want to ask you about. Why do you think people find it hard to read when we have all these all this technology, all these uses to read,
Mm.
these tools to read, not uses?
I think the main problem probably is that people find it hard to sit down and focus on something like a book for more than a couple minutes, or even up to 15, 20, 30 minutes. And that the alternative, which is scrolling through Instagram or other apps, usually seems more attractive and provides the short-term dopamine hit in the
Mm,
brain, while reading probably doesn't provide immediate like positive feedback. So I think that's the biggest issue. And
mm,
then another thing that I wanted to mention is probably that many people don't see the long-term benefit of reading such books, so they don't really see why they should do it.
mm. So it's more the dopamine, the short term dopamine effect. But here's the thing I do notice when you do actually complete the book, there is
Mm,
still a dopamine effect. I mean, when you do anything, you're going to get some form of dopamine effect, but I think it's a delayed gratification as
mm,
opposed to that. But you you touched on something that I wanted to elaborate a little more. Is you said that they don't see the long term effect. Why do you think that is?
that's a good question. I mean, for some people, they I feel like some people are kind of complacent, so they don't really think that they can or they are worthy of getting
Mm,
something better than they currently have. So that's already an issue, because if you don't feel worthy of something better, then why would you even start doing something to improve your circumstance, or like to improve your life? And then the next thing is that, yeah, I feel like some people don't connect the reading nonfiction books with this might make my life easier. For example, living healthier, or earning a little more money, which removes money problems. So I feel like that's part of the issue, but it's a really tough question, to be honest. I don't have the answer to it,
yeah,
but
I
that's
don't. I
what I
don't.
think could be the issue.
So maybe, yeah, you're right. They're not seeing this as a solution to their problems. They're
Mm,
seeing it as, well, I'm just gonna hear things that it's not gonna do anything. Like they've kind of already come in with a defeated attitude of this is
mm.
this is worthless. It's a book. Who cares? What is it going to do
Yeah,
for you?
it's more like leisure or something you do when you have too much time or something
Yeah.
to just get knowledge, but not really change anything.
The thing I noticed though with a book is if you can get somebody to sit down and, take it in, slowly it will disarm that opinion because books
Mm,
have that idea of just like there's something about reading that just gets you to, I mean, you can't come in with rigid ideas, but in some ways it shows you another perspective. And sometimes you'll look at it and be like, I didn't see that way. Now, I think you kind of have to be somewhat open to it,
mm,
but I think that might be this. Can we get them to just sit down for a moment, maybe 5 minutes, and do that? Um, the guy that I interviewed last week, Amrut Deshmukh, said the booklet guy. He said just start with 2 pages.
mm.
If you can just do 2 pages a day, and he said that the bigger the task is, the more we will have the need to just procrastinate.
Yeah.
So if we started with just like, okay, all you gotta do is read a page, then by proxy, you'll probably read more. Do you think that's a way to look at it? Or do you think that technique could work?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think this even stems from Atomic Habits. So this is a good way for people who want to read more, but I'm not sure if it would work with people who are not really open to the concept of I'm going to sit down and read.
Yeah.
So for those people, what I think might be the biggest thing is just to follow their own curiosity, just telling them, try to pick a nonfiction book, but just read something that you want to read because you think it's interesting or it's cool or it's fascinating or whatever. And then people might pick like entirely different things. But if they make the decision to read about this topic because they like it, they are way more likely to finish the book, in my opinion. So I think that's the best way to get into reading and then kind of to read consistently. You could do something like apply the 2 minute rule and say something like, okay, I'm just going to read 2 minutes a day.
Yeah. That's an interesting way to look at it. I it's I don't know, I just went blank.
No worries. Yeah. So, because as
That'll
I said,
happen.
for me, the beginning, how I got back into reading was just I read about a German adventurer. So it's not that I was like, I want to read now to improve my life in the beginning. It was just, let me just pick up this book because it sounds exciting. And then, yeah, I don't even know what the next book was, but it was also something that I was actually interested in. So, and
Yeah.
and when you read about, when you start reading, for example, personal development books, what I also realized is that once you start doing that, you get even more interested in the topic. And then every book recommends a ton of new books. So you kind of
Yes.
go into this rabbit hole and you never get out of it again.
And then you can get stuck where I am, where you're just like, oh, I don't have that book. And then you've got like
Exactly.
you've got a million books, and you're like, wait, I haven't even touched this book.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
Like ebooks. Like I go on Amazon, it's like, ooh, it's on sale. I gotta get it. And then it just sits there. Going back to Atomic Habits, I mean, that's one of the things he talks about is changing your mind, changing kind of who you are and how you see things is
Hmm.
usually the best way to get started. Like he mentions the 3 ways to change. And he said the best way is really to just change. If you can change your idea of how you perceive yourself, then a lot of things will fit into place.
Hmm. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's a big thing. Identity, and I've heard other people talk about it too. Because yeah, as you said, the way you perceive yourself kind of shapes your decisions, shapes your actions, and in that way, like if you see yourself as an athlete, you will start doing like or start eating healthier, start focusing more on rest and recovery, but also on working out, obviously. So yeah, I mean, it's just that, as you said, if you think about yourself as something or someone, then you're more likely to do what a person like that would do.
Yeah. Self-image. That's the way to do it. So I ask this to everybody, but like, what is your beginning of the day routine?
So right now, I just finished studying. Actually, I just finished my bachelor's thesis about a
Oh,
week ago. So
yeah.
right now, I don't really have a routine because I'm enjoying my free time, kind of sleeping
I don't
in.
believe you.
And
I don't
yeah,
believe you.
so but generally, it's something like um, getting up. First thing is always drinking water because I learned about how important it is to hydrate first thing in the morning. And then I usually grab a coffee. Sometimes I have breakfast immediately. Sometimes I have it a little later, but I always read a book while having breakfast when I'm by myself. So when I'm with my girlfriend or with family, then I chat with them. But when I'm by myself, then I read a book.
Hmm.
And yeah, then usually it's actually just um, getting to my desk and like checking what's up on today and starting to work. I don't really have a big morning routine right now with any habits or that kind of stuff. I prefer to do most of that later in the day. So yeah, it's very short actually.
So, and now today, since you just finished the bachelor's degree, you're in the 5 p.m. club.
Yeah. uh, I don't sleep in that long, but yeah, it's closer to that than to the 5 a.m. club.
I should do that. Like do like a mock-up of Robin Sharman and be like, "Well, I preach the 5 p.m. club. Sleep the whole day, and then just do nothing."
That would be hilarious, yeah.
you know, it's goes 5 a.m. because I said, well, I'm kind of more the 5 p.m. club. The day's over.
True. Yeah, because I know
um,
people, I have a friend and he's like a huge night owl. Like he sometimes sleeps actually until 4 p.m. and then but he's so smart and he gets his shit done and I'm like, how the fuck are you doing that? but
yeah.
but he stays up until 4 a.m. every day and just works at night when everybody else is sleeping. So it's
And I
crazy.
think I think that's part of that's another thing that like it's like it doesn't really matter the time you wake up. It's the time that works for you and the time that you get things done. This is the problem I have with like the 5 a.m. club thing. It's like,
Mm,
okay, it's not really the five. It's this is the time I've set to my, when I wake up that I'm going to do something,
mm,
you know, here, and I'm balancing out my day. But it really doesn't matter when you wake up. I think people get kind of like stuck in that mindset of,
yeah.
oh, I gotta wake up at 5 a.m. because this guy wakes up at 5 a.m. It's like, okay, yeah, but that works for him. And
Mm,
yes, it may work for most entrepreneurs, but not necessarily you, So it's like
yeah.
think a little outside that, as opposed to being like, well, so and so said to do this, so I must do that. And it's like, no, you're just a puppet now.
And it's especially worthless if you get up at 5 a.m. and then
Yeah,
waste an hour or
yeah,
two later on social
yeah.
media. Like you could have just slept until 7 and spent an hour less on social media. So yeah, I mean, I don't have anything against getting up
Yeah, me
early
neither.
or sleeping in late. As you said, it's just about at the end of the day, what
Yeah,
results do you put out? It doesn't matter what time you get up,
yeah.
and it's what works for you. Yeah.
Yeah, if you take a cold shower every day and you don't really do anything with it, it really doesn't do anything.
Yeah. True.
People get so stuck in there. It's like, yes, the cold shower is good, but it's like, it's one way of doing things. Stop looking at it like there's like only one way. That's my problem with some of the self-help books. It's just like they're like almost telling you like this is the only way to do it. And it's like,
Mm,
no, there's multiple ways to do it. Be
yeah.
open to all the different ways. So the next thing I want to ask you before you wrap up is the nighttime routine. What is that?
That's also very short. So I the first thing of my nighttime routine is that I sit down with my little journal I have and I write down the 5 most important things that I want to get done the next day. This is a concept that I learned from one of my favorite mentors, Andy Frisella, and he preaches this. He calls it the power list, and he says basically that if you just get done the 5 most important things each day, then you win the day. And if you just keep winning each day, then you will end up winning the week, the month, the year. And so that's one of the main concepts I apply. Putting down these 5 tasks, and after that, I usually just grab a book, read, and go to bed. But there's not much more than that.
Yeah. So small. Yeah. And I like what you said. Yeah. The small goals equal to the big goals. Start
Exactly.
small, do those things. The compound effect. I'm sure you've read that book. That's,
Yeah.
you start with meditation will lead to, okay, I'm going to get up earlier. I'm going to do this, or I'm going to eat healthier. They, same thing would happen if, you decide like, I'm just not going to do anything all day. It could just compound to
to nothing.
6 months of being on the couch.
Yeah, true.
The opposite of what you want. Yeah, I compounded it. First, it started with video games. Then I started waking up. It's
5 p.m.
5 p.m. Then I started eating popcorn every day as the first meal, and then I, decided to no longer walk anymore. And now I'm here.
Yeah, it works both ways. That's it. That's true. Yeah.
Now, do you meditate?
Not regularly. I wouldn't say I meditate. I'm kind of every now and then, but it's kind of rare.
I'm a meditate whenever I feel like it.
Yeah, bro. That's more like it.
Yeah.
I haven't focused on making this a routine yet. So
What do you think it is about the meditation that, because I've heard this a lot, and that's another concept I'm trying to like break down into. I'm just curious, like how, like what is it about? Is it just the stopping everything to just, is the idea of trying to not think? Like what is the concept that you think you struggle with?
so I don't feel like I have a problem with just sitting down and being with myself. I don't think that that's an obstacle for me. I think the biggest obstacle is actually just making the time and thinking about it, thinking about doing it every day. Because, yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
just I'm going to do it right now, the prioritizing it and then actually doing it more than the I don't feel comfortable with doing it. Because
Yeah.
I mean, 5 to 10 minutes of meditation are not a big hurdle for me right now because I've done longer periods of meditation in the past. I mean, not that I've done long sessions, but I've done meditation for a while. Yeah, but right now it's just not. I'm just not doing it. Basically.
Have you read the book by Vishen Lakhiani's The Code of the Extraordinary Mind? He's the
I haven't.
person who's done Mind Valley. I'm sure you've seen
Yeah,
advertisements
I
for
know
that. It's
him.
like everywhere. Yeah, he has a meditation called the 6-phase meditation. What I like about it is you can do it anywhere, and it's not. It could be 5 minutes, it could be 1 minute, it could be 6 minutes, it could be whatever time. I would recommend looking at that, the 6-phase meditation with Vishen Lakhiani. It's a fantastic. I mean, once you put in 6-phase meditation, it will show up. But it's a great way to because you're right. There are the ones that are like even longer, like a Joe Dispenza. He recommends like an hour. That's
an obstacle
that
right
is
there.
hard.
Like,
that is
yeah,
hard.
That's hard. Yeah.
And he's right. The more you get in set into it, but there's something about this is why I really want to interview him. Is I want to be like, how do we get rid of this idea of that I'm doing it right? Because that seems to
Mm,
be the thing that's always swimming in my mind. It's like, did I do it right? Is
yeah.
this right? Is
Is
this
this
right?
am I supposed to be doing this right now? Like,
Do I get a thumbs up or like, it's like it's hard to just like let go. And I know we're supposed to let go of those elements, but those elements are still like just swimming around in my head, especially with his. And that's something that because I can't recommend his stuff enough. Joe Dispenza stuff is great,
mm,
but you do have to set time to it. Whereas Vishen, you could do that anywhere. The time isn't the set thing. With Joe, it is, you got to really block out, an hour of your time to just sit there
mm,
and do it. And the thing that I'll happen to me is I'll wake up out of it and I'll be like, wait a minute, do I start over? did, I,
yeah.
did I screw it all up? And I was like, time wasted. It's an hour of
Mm,
nothing, like that. These are some of the things that I wrestle with. So I would recommend Joe Dispenza, but to getting it into habit, I would
mm.
recommend Vishen Lakhiani's 6-phase meditation because it really helps. All right, now let's get into some fun stuff. I'm a big movie guy. What movies do you like?
Oh, I'm easy with that. I think
Okay,
it's
cool.
just the typical action stuff. Like I'm very basic. I don't
Yeah.
have, yeah, nothing like too general. I also like I don't know what how you could explain that genre, but stuff like 300 or
Yeah.
like warrior stuff, like the serious Vikings, stuff like that.
Yeah.
I enjoy
Game of
that.
Thrones.
I haven't watched it, but I know that I would love it. Right now, I'm kind of trying
You
to
you
resist
like it?
starting it because
You
it's so
like it?
long.
Just stop at season 7 and
Really?
you'll have a nice time. As
Okay.
opposed to all of us who had to wait an hour, wait a year and a half, and have very disappointing circumstances because it was like,
Really?
so read up to 6, maybe even stop at 5.
Mm,
That's when they get away from the books, and
mm.
you'll have a nice time.
Yeah, and like now I
7
have
and
the time to watch it actually, so that's a
yeah,
great idea.
I think you will like. I mean, if you like that stuff, do you like the
Yeah,
Marvel movies?
yeah, I do.
Are you excited for did you see the last Spider-Man?
Not yet actually. No, I'm not
That's
that kind of. I'm not a
that's a
big
good one.
movie guy in general, so I'm
Yeah.
not like watching the latest movies and everything.
Yeah.
I don't watch movies very often, but I enjoy watching one every now and then. So I haven't watched it yet, but I heard that it's like people loved it, and I was
Oh
surprised
yeah.
by that because
Oh, it's very good.
usually new movies with action heroes from the past aren't that good. So I
Yeah.
was surprised that people love it so much.
No, they did this. They did this well. They did it
Mm,
right, and it's
I
very
gotta
hard to
watch it.
get 3 movies right. Usually they screw it up at like 2,
Yeah.
and we're like, or the Spider-Man before that, where it's like, oh, these first 2 are really good.
Mhm.
This third one, no, it's not good.
It's usually
it's
like
be,
that. Yeah.
it's like a meme. It became a meme how bad it was that like people would use it as like when the Will Smith stuff started coming out. They're like, well, what would happen if Will Smith slapped Bully Maguire? So yeah, that's another book I want to read, but now I'm kind of like, do I read it now and look at it and go, oh, he really doesn't believe any of this because
Mm,
he did that, or will I understand
I
more
think
of
it's
why he did
rather
it?
that. Yeah.
You
So
think did you read
it,
it?
yeah, I read it a
Okay.
couple months ago, and the co-author Mark Manson. I read his newsletter recently, and he said
Yeah.
this too. Like, if you've read the book, then you will understand. You will better
Yeah.
understand why this happened.
Man,
Yeah,
I love that he got Mark Manson to do the
me too. Yeah.
to do the book. So I just want to say thank you for coming on. This is great.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I mean, it's only my second podcast interview, and I'm really enjoying these, so that's
Yeah, this
awesome.
is fun.
And it was nice talking to you.
Absolutely. So how can people reach you?
Yeah, so the best way to reach me is through my Instagram page, which is Timo's Notes. There's also an email address on there where you can email me if you want to. But yeah, best way is just DM me on Instagram.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. And I appreciate it.
Thank you, Justin.
Okay. I want to thank at Timo's Notes. You can also find books with Timos. Um, you can sign up for his newsletter on Instagram. You can find the new Timos Notes website. Also, you can grab a copy of Culture Built My Brand. It has a nice link tree there. As always, you can find me at Justin Yance. I want to thank you for listening. And as always, I will see you next time on the DMF